Putin breaking news where Putin and Xi disagree. Last month, when Chinese President Xi Jinping and Russian President Vladimir Putin met in Moscow, China sent Russia a clear message to avoid nuclear war by rebuking Russia for its nuclear threats against Ukraine. Putin, who had previously threatened to use nuclear weapons in retaliation for various battlefield escalations, agreed to sign a joint communiqué that explicitly forbade the use of such weapons. At least, that's how it seemed for a few hours. China and Russia made a number of commitments, including that all nuclear weapon states should refrain from deploying nuclear weapons abroad. However, shortly after Xi left Moscow, Putin announced plans to deploy tactical nuclear arms to Belarus, a neighboring country that could serve as a staging ground for Russian invasion forces. Rapid action was taken by China. Foreign Ministry spokesman Mao Ning told reporters in Beijing on March 27 that, under the current circumstances, all sides should focus on diplomatic efforts for a peaceful resolution of the Ukraine crisis and work together for de-escalation. Russia and China may appear to be in agreement on Ukraine policy, but this incident provided a striking glimpse into the tensions that lie beneath the surface. China, despite providing substantial financial and propaganda aid to Russia, prefers the role of peacemaker to that of aggressor. On the other hand, Putin sees Ukraine as a mortal enemy of Russia that must be destroyed. In effect, Xi has to walk a fine line when working with Putin. He praises the no limits relations between the two countries, a welcome diplomatic boost in the midst of a war that isn't going Russia's way, while wanting to keep it within the bounds of his core foreign policies. However, in the case of Ukraine, even China sometimes has to give in. Consider China's stated commitment to upholding sovereign rights. A month before the Moscow summit, Beijing released a 12-point peace plan for Ukraine. The statement stressed the importance of protecting each nation's right to self-determination and territorial integrity. When asked about respect for sovereignty during their meeting in Moscow, neither Xi nor Putin mentioned it once. Putin's overall reaction to China's peace outline should also be taken into account. He stated openly that parts of the plan were unacceptable, though he did not elaborate. Putin stated, "Many of the provisions of the peace plan put forward by China are consonant with Russian approaches and could form a basis for a peaceful settlement." The Russian leader then added a sort of emergency exit from having to decide. The West and Kiev had to sign on first. Washington and Kiev both oppose the plan because it does not call for all Russian forces in Ukraine to be withdrawn. Despite this, a split between China and Russia is extremely improbable due to these disagreements. Beijing has certainly not prepared the public for such a dramatic change. Its media is full of critiques blaming American hegemony and bullying for causing the war, as do Chinese leaders in their public statements. No matter how the US and Europe try to convince China otherwise, in Beijing's view, the convergence of Chinese and Russian interests in countering the US will outweigh their dig interests, such as the competition for regional leadership and sphere of influence, wrote Yun Sun, a senior fellow at the Stimson Center, a foreign policy think tank in Washington. Prior to the Sino-Russian summit, outsiders predicted it would focus on Ukraine. The US government expressed concern that China would announce a willingness to supply arms to Russia at the meeting. It turned out that those assumptions were incorrect. In official accounts, the Ukraine conflict was treated as a second-tier issue. On the first day of the summit, March 21, Xi mentioned the crisis, saying China was against adding fuel to the fire, a coded reference to the United States, and would continue to seek a political settlement. Ukraine was mentioned only once in a 9-paragraph Chinese Foreign Ministry summary of a press conference held on March 24. Xi declared that China had adopted a neutral and objective stance on the matter. Xi shifted the emphasis to commercial and industrial cooperation as well as people-to-people exchanges. Putin did not address Ukraine, but the Chinese reported that he welcomes China's willingness to play a constructive role. Some analysts speculated that Xi is not in a rush to press for the end of the war. Western economies face higher fuel costs as a result of the conflict, while China benefits from below-market, friendship rates for Russian oil thanks to the escalation between the two countries. In addition, there are political voices in almost every Western country that are opposed to involvement, including some members of the U.S. Republican Party and some minority parties in France and Italy. In an article for the Central European Institute of Asian Studies in Slovakia, researcher Martin Sebina argued that if China does nothing, any outcome, whether a disaster for Russia or a victory for the Kremlin over Ukraine, would likely favor Beijing. Sebina argued that China stands to benefit greatly from the conflict in Ukraine. He speculated that should Russia win, it would strengthen a China ally, at the expense of the West, but should Russia lose, it would leave Russia economically weakened and tied to China. The conflict between Russia and Ukraine has benefited China's economy. Chinese exports to Russia have increased by a factor of 2 in the past year. China has surpassed Germany as Russia's top energy importer thanks to its ability to purchase cheap fossil fuel from Russia. Despite potential diplomatic roadblocks, Putin appears confident that the relationship will endure. A 42-page foreign policy manifesto, outlining plans to strengthen ties with countries that oppose Western dominance, was released on March 31. He singled out China and India as two major candidates for cooperation. Besides buying Russian oil at a discount and voting against sanctions, India has also abstained on UN votes condemning Russia's invasion. India has increased its purchases of Russian oil by a factor of 10 in the past year. Putin's stated objective was stated in the document as follows: the Russian Federation intends to give priority to the elimination of vestiges of the dominance of the United States and other unfriendly countries in world politics. China has joined for those reasons.